welcome to today's program. We're super glad to have you. Just a couple of notes. This is a Zoom webinar. It's not a Zoom meeting, so we can't actually see your faces. We can't talk to you during the class. So if and when you have questions, you'll hit the Q&A box on your Zoom menu. You can type your questions in there, and I can see we're now streaming live on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook watching, then you can type your questions into the comments. I monitor those during the class as well. We are recording this virtual plant clinic, and it is available afterwards, usually within about 24 hours. If you guys want to follow up, or if you have to leave early, you can send me a note and ask for it. And I think that about covers all of our notes. David's going to be covering some summer prep information today. I know we've got some hot weather coming soon. As always, it is that time of year. So David, I'm going to go ahead and let you dive into it.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody to this week's virtual plant clinic. So as Sally mentioned, we are going to talk about weeds, insects, and disease. Now, my reason for picking this topic is because right now, the month of May, things actually slow down at the plant clinic, believe it or not, because May is typically the beautiful month in the garden. May is when everything is kind of idyllic and you can go out in the garden, everything's flowering, blooming, flourishing, and we enjoy that. This crazy weather we've been having, it's been interesting. I don't know about any of you others out there, but I think like the iris in my garden have really held up really beautifully this year. They're loving this cool, wet weather and stuff. Got Kousa dogwood blooming. So things are really looking nice in the garden, and we should absolutely enjoy every bit of it because this is what we work for. This is what we live for, and we want to make the best of it. But the reality is, just because of my position at the plant clinic, I'm sort of looking ahead and said, well, everything is really, really nice right now, but it's about to change because as we move into warmer weather conditions, quite honestly, it's more as we move into June and our temperatures start to go up, that all the problems and issues with weeds, insects, disease, all that stuff starts to kick in. So I thought it would be a good thing to talk about ahead of time, talk about some of the things that we are looking towards so we can actually get prepared, make our plans, and understand what is coming at us as we kind of start to see some of the beauty fade and some of the pests show up. So that's where I'm coming from today, and we're going to talk to this about weeds, insects, and disease. So I think what I want to do is almost approach today as almost sort of like three little segments. I've only got, I think, 2 or 3 slides on each topic, but we're going to talk about weeds. At that point, I'll take a couple questions. Then we'll talk about some disease issues, and we'll take a few questions from you. And then we'll talk about insects and take a few questions from you. So this means I'm looking at about 10 to 15 minutes each on each segment. And if we have any time at the end, of course, we can field questions that you didn't get, or feel free to send us questions, any questions you might have about what's going on in your garden. So with that, let me get started and talk to you a little bit about weeds and weed control in our garden. Okay, so basically what I want to talk to you about are annual weeds. Annual weeds, basically, you've seen this, they complete their life cycle, meaning they go from seed, maturity, and then die, and they do all this in one growing season. It's like my little schematic shows here. That seed germinates, it goes through a juvenile state, it reaches maturity, at which point they pollinate, produce their seeds, and then they die. And all of this happens within one growing season. So one of the ways, the most effective and easiest ways to manage weeds in your garden is with a pre-emergent, a preventative treatment. So this means we make a application, a weed control application right in here that stops that seed before it even gets going. So when we talk about that, that's where we use the word a pre-emergent treatment. This is put on prior to the emergence of the weed. So a lot of us, again, not everybody, there's many different ways to approach this, but a lot of us may have gone out and applied a weed preventer in March or April. And when we're doing this, it's applied sort of in this little diagram showing a lot of times it's applied as a granule, can be put out over your lawn, your garden bed, landscape beds. If you're doing this, add a little bit of water. And what we're trying to show visually is we're creating a chemical barrier at the surface of the soil. And when that seed begins to germinate, that little radical, they call it, that first little baby root that starts to pop out from that seed, it comes in contact with this chemical barrier and it kills the root tip. So it prevents those seeds from being able to get established. I always emphasize this because it's not actually killing the seed. The seed is there and it remains there, but it's when that seed begins to germinate, comes in contact, kills it, prevents it from growing. Now, these barriers, this chemical barrier you put down with your weed preventer, it doesn't last forever. It might last a matter of weeks. It might last a matter of months, depending on the product that's there. Most of them will give you treatment effective control for a period of about 3 months. But again, that's very product specific. It also varies with the weather, the amount of rain we've had, those kind of things. So a couple real life examples of this would be weeds like crabgrass, which everybody's familiar with. Crabgrass is referred to as a summer annual weed. So again, it goes from seed all the way through maturity in one season, and it does this during the warm weather of summer. So crabgrass seed begins to germinate when our soil temperatures get into the 50s, and the warmer it gets, the more vigorous it becomes. So crabgrass loves the warmth and it loves the heat. So this means that as we start moving into June and July, the germination rate, the establishment rate, the growth of crabgrass will continue to accelerate. One of the things that happens is, understand again with weeds, these seeds don't all spontaneously germinate at the same time. So if a crabgrass seed, for example, produces about 1,000 seeds, that seed will lie on the ground, and the following year, only about 50% of that seed will germinate. 50% of that seed is held onto for future years. So if you had crabgrass last year and it dropped 1,000 seeds on the ground, there's 500 of those seeds that are available for germination this year. This will happen. It doesn't happen instantaneously or spontaneously when the soil temperature hit 50. It begins growing when soil temperatures in our 50s. As we go into the 60s, it gets even more, and it continues to go into our soil temperatures in the 70s, even up to 80 degrees. So crabgrass, for example, hits peak germination usually in July. Japanese stiltgrass, which is a widespread weed that we see growing everywhere. So I'm trying to get my slides to advance. Japanese stiltgrass, it actually starts a little bit earlier in the season. So it can start as early as March, but similar to crabgrass, it continues to germinate and sprout even as we go later into the season. And that seed, again, can remain viable in the soil for many, many years. So this concept or this idea that, hey, I'm going to put down a weed preventer and that's going to take care of it, that's not the whole story. So the thing is that I'm trying to emphasize with all this, and this is true whether you're talking about Japanese clover, which, or Lespedeza as it's called, or spurge. These are all summer annual weeds. They start growing maybe as early as, at the very earliest, March. This year has been cool and wet, so we started maybe seeing some germination more towards late April. It's little baby sprouts right now in your garden. These plants are only about an inch tall, but they're growing, and this problem is going to continue to get worse and worse and more noticeable. So my take-home message on this is essentially, if you applied a weed preventer to your lawn in spring, let's say kind of like that March, April time period, that is probably about to expire because it's going to last for best maybe 90 days. So if I put it down, it goes April, May, June. By the end of June, it's going to be expired and all the weeds start showing up in July, August, September. So it's not an urgency, but I want to bring it to your attention so that you have the opportunity now to put down your second application of weed preventer if you choose to do that, to get ahead of these problems. So that's my little talk on weeds. What I want to do is see if we have any questions at this time regarding weed control. Sally, has anybody sends questions?
Yep, we have one in about weeds, and another question that I'm not sure what category it falls into, but it's not about weeds, so we can hold on that one. First one is, how do I get rid of Japanese stiltgrass growing among other plants, in particular woodland ferns?
Okay, let me go back to my little diagram here. So the way these weed preventers work, if you look at this, and just this could be a woodland fern or it could be turf grass, but the roots of the existing plant are down here in the soil profile. The chemical barrier stays really in this top inch or so of the soil. So you can use a weed preventer even in flower beds and garden beds. Again, if you expect them to reseed, that could be an issue there. So with stilt grass in a landscape bed, what you would need to do is right now, you can go through and hand pull the weeds while they're still small, and then put a weed preventer down to prevent it from happening later this summer. That's really your only choice. Now I'm talking primarily about pre-emergent weed controls. You know, mulching can help also, so it doesn't have to be a chemical option, that though they are convenient, work in large areas. But the other would be to kind of weed it out, cultivate it, do the hand weeding right now, and come back in and put down an inch or two of mulch. That can help to deter it, but again, it's probably not going to give you quite the same level of control that the pre-emergents do. And the other question, Sally, is that do we want to talk about that now, or?
I'll go ahead and tell it to you. That's why I just let this person know. I said I'm not sure if it's like watering pest or disease. They have foliage on a plant, the Landseer, that's turning yellow. So I'm assuming that's more of like a water pest disease.
Yeah, that's probably, you know, to me, we're probably going to be talking about aphids, and we'll hit that one a little bit later in the program.
Sounds
So
good.
let's move on, talk a little bit about some disease issues.
Oh, actually, I have a question about weed preventers. Do you want to hold
Sure.
it? Or, okay. This person says, with the environmental issues about chemicals going into streams, why do you put down weed preventers? I have a storm drain. Okay, so this person has a storm drain in their backyard, so they're concerned about the environmental issues with weed preventers. So are there any alternatives that work, or do you have any other suggestions if you don't want to use a chemical?
So again, I'm always going to say, hey, we want to work with all our cultural practices of maintaining plant density, how we manage the soil using mulches, things like that is always going to be our first line defense. But just because I am talking about the chemicals today. The pre-emergent, the weed preventers bind to the soil, just like we were showing in that earlier picture. When you put a weed preventer down, it adheres to the soil, it's chemically bound there. And it's not going to leach into the soil or run off. The only way that weed preventer is going to move from your garden into the stream is if you have some type of erosion, if it's such a heavy downpour or soil's exposed. And this is a little bit of a thing with me. Our number one source of contamination in streams really comes through erosion. All these adverse things, you know, and I'm going a little off tangent, but I spent 6 years working with water quality before coming to Merrifield. Atmospheric deposition, what goes out of our tailpipes or out of smokestacks goes up in the air, comes down in the rain. We have a huge air problem in our area with impervious surfaces, roads, rooftops, sidewalks, anything that lands on an impervious surface going right down in the storm drain. And that's where most of our non-point source pollution comes from. Erosion, and this is where pretty much all our laws come from is erosion. When soil starts to erode and move, whatever chemicals are bound to it erodes and moves with it, along with siltation it causes itself. So what's really important, and we can do this as gardeners, this is again where gardening is so important to us, is keep the soil protected. You'll hear me say that all the time. Number one, your best way to protect the soil and stop these things is to keep the ground covered with plants. And I'm talking about trees, shrubs, perennials, lawns. Just keep the soil covered, keep it in place is hugely important. That's in there. And I even lost where I was going with that kind of thought. So if, to your question, these products, and this has been shown over and over and over through science, they are not running off of your lawn or garden into the stream. That's through inappropriate use, impervious surface, or if you don't cover the soil and you allow that soil to erode and wash out. So you're doing a good thing just by maintaining a garden and keeping plants there to protect the soil. Anyway, a long answer to a simple question. Anything
I had
else?
no idea. That's great. I had never heard that before, and we've done a lot of classes together. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I try not to get on my soapbox, but my whole gardening career started with a class on soils when I was in Sunday school. There was actually a soil appreciation week. I never heard of that. And I had soil scientists talk to us about what soil does for us, and it's a whole amazing topic by itself. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Let's any more weeds, or do we want to go back to diseases?
Not for now. I think we're ready to move forward.
All right. So diseases, there's this concept. Again, this is a rehash of things that we've talked about before, but it might be the first time you've seen it. Classic little thing that we use in terms of plant pathology is we call the disease triangle. There's three elements that must come together for a disease outbreak to occur. One is a susceptible host. So clearly the host has to be present. The other is a pathogen, and with plants, most of what we're talking about are fungal infections. Plants do get bacterial and viral infections, but by far, way outweighing those is fungal pathogens that tend to go after plants. So it's a matter of having the host, the pathogen, and when I say favorable environment, an environment that's favorable for the disease. And so when these three pieces come together, we have a disease outbreak. So our control strategies really consist of, if I can break any one of these three legs of the triangle, I can prevent that disease from occurring. So the host, which we're talking about, are plants in the garden. The pathogen are fungal spores that are spread on the wind, the air, the soil. They're pretty much omnipresent. But then it's when the environment changes. And when I say the environment, it's a function of temperature and moisture. We are just beginning to see some disease problems. And that's because the host plant has been there, the moisture's been there, but for the large extent, our temperatures have been cool. So again, as we start to warm up, that's when we're going to really see these disease outbreaks start to go crazy. So in this case, I'm using powdery mildew just as an example because it's so widespread, it's easy to see, it's very visible in the garden. So powdery mildew, for example, needs temperatures of about 70 to 85 degrees and high humidity. You can see like 70 to 99%. So we are beginning to see some mildew because we have had the moisture, the humidity's been there, but the temperatures have been lower. I think I just looked at my phone before going on air. I think we're currently at 69 degrees. Like I said, mildew starts showing up at about 70 degrees. So we haven't seen a lot of it, but when we hit that temperature and moisture combination, that's when it will show up. The spores are actually spread on the wind. This is a microscopic view of the spores. So you'll see this little grayish white mold growing. And under a microscope, it's putting up these structures, and each one of these little beads is a spore. And that is spread and dispersed by the wind and the air. So coming at us is going to be, as we move into June, we start seeing this is mildew on bee balm or Monarda. This is mildew on turf, which we've been seeing, mildew on zinnias, mildew on euonymus, you'll see mildew on roses, mildew on cucumbers, you know, the list goes on. So many of our plants are susceptible to it. And what's going to happen is when we get the temperature and moisture regime, that's when it shows up. So back to what I was saying, what we can do on a cultural level, what can we do to prevent this? One of it is selecting the plants that we select. If I know that mildew is going to be a problem in my garden, maybe I choose not to grow that plant. Like I absolutely love Monarda, bee balm. It's a fantastic plant from every perspective. I personally don't grow it because it's going to get the mildew. Mildew doesn't kill plants. Here's the other thing. So, I mean, you can just live with the mildew. It's ugly, it's unsightly, it turns the leaves brown. You know, there's a lot of things not to like about it, but it's not a killer. So that's what I say, accepting the situation, keeping the area as clean as we can, meaning like if I have diseased plants, if I remove the source of the disease, that can help. Good air circulation to help, you know, keep the foliage dry, you know, lower the humidity in that level, in that area. And again, accepting that it lives with. But for example, you know, I have roses behind me. I choose not to grow roses because I know I'm going to have to deal with these disease issues. I choose not to grow Monarda because I know I'm going to have disease issues with it. So I can just avoid it there. But this kind of goes true with every disease, and they just hit different requirements. So turf, as an example, lawns have been loving this cool weather, and they've been looking fantastic because they're cool season grasses. They thrive when temperatures are kind of 50 to 75 degrees and frequent moisture, the conditions that we have. But as we move into June, Rhizoctonia blight, which is a fungal pathogen, it's there, it exists in the thatch layer, it's in your yard, it's in my yard. You're not going to avoid the pathogen, it's there. But when we start getting temperatures that are more kind of this sort of 75, 85 degree kind of temperature range, and we have frequent wet, rainy conditions, then boom, this stuff starts to show up. These are foliar diseases. It kills the leaf, causes these brown spots, but it doesn't actually get into the roots. So we either just live with it, deal with it, do all our cultural practices. But the other thing, and this is where I wanted to talk about, but then our other choice really is to intervene with a fungicide. So again, these fungicides don't cure disease. It's a treatment that's available to you. Fungicides can protect a plant from infections. So they are just similar to like the pre-emergent, I said, puts down and inhibits that seed, prevents it from being able to get established in the soil. A fungicide is applied to the plant and it prevents or protects that spore from being able to gain entry into it. So fungicides are applied most effectively as a preventative measure. They are going to remain effective for about 7 to 10 days for a lot of them, what I call contact fungicides, which are just on the surface. Some of these systemic products are actually absorbed into the plant tissue and might remain effective for up to 30 days. So you haven't solved the problem. You've treated the problem, and in your best possible circumstances, you may be treated for 30 days. 30 days later, if you are still in the same environment with the same susceptible plants, you're going to find yourself back in the same situation. So these always require repeat applications if you're going to go that route. So it's a tool that's available to us, but understand the limitations of it. You're not curing the disease. And it bothers me again on some of the products that will actually use the word cure on that. Understand the curative effect of what might be called, what I call kickback, is effective for anywhere from like normally 1 or 2 days from the time of application. So it's, you haven't really cured the disease. It's like, okay, I can get it on there, and its curative effect is measured in hours or days. I don't think that's really what most of us as consumers are looking for. So these are things that are coming at you. Again, my strategy really is a lot to deal with selecting plants that are resistant to it. And this is what the breeders, the plant people grow and develop a lot of plants for us. They're trying to look at disease resistance, keeping the source of pathogens down, and that's basically cleanliness, which meaning we're removing diseased plants. All of these things, back to our disease triangle, they all require moist conditions. So this is where we talk about trying to keep the foliage dry, keep water off of the foliage for extended periods of time. And then if you are going to go in with fungicides, particularly, please bring us samples, bring samples into the plant clinic. Let's get it, make sure it's a good diagnosis and that we actually are treating the correct problem with the correct treatment. And that's my little disease talk. And let's see if we have any questions regarding diseases in the garden. And then we're going to talk about a couple insects.
Yep, we do have some questions. Okay, so this first one is from someone who's starting to see powdery mildew on their dogwood tree. Is there anything that they can do about it at this point, or is it kind of at that point where you can kind of live with it?
Yeah. So you can treat it because they said mildew is like 75, 85 degrees. The problem is probably going to get worse before it gets better. But again, this is the importance of understanding what the limitations of the treatment are. This is what I feel like my job is trying to manage everybody's expectations when I'm trying to help them. So the foliage that's infected now, we can't really reverse that. We can't cure it. What you can do is spray it with a fungicide that will prevent it from progressing. It will prevent it from spreading into the new foliage and new leaves. So if you were to choose, if you wanted to treat it with a systemic fungicide, particularly, that would give you about 30 days control. 30 days from now, if we are still trapped in this same weather kind of environment, then you may have to make a repeat application. But my guess is 30 days from now, we're going to be looking at totally different weather conditions, environmental conditions. So you might choose to spray it right now to prevent it from progressing. Again, also understand mildew does not kill trees. It will cause the leaves to get moldy looking. It will cause those leaves to brown. It will reduce the vigor of the plant. But if you choose to not treat it, the tree will survive to see another day.
Okay, excellent. Next, this is a comment, actually. This is interesting. I don't know if you've heard of this, but Proven Winners has developed several powdery mildew resistant varieties of bee balm. So I don't know if we have those or if you've tried them out.
I haven't tried them out, but that's what I rely on, is looking for breeders to find me resistant varieties. So I shouldn't just write off a plant like that because things change. I need to. What I do like to do is I like to try them in my own garden before I go out and get too excited about it. But I appreciate that. I really do. I'm going to look for those because I'd love to add it to my garden. And now I've got a little bit of hope out there. Thank you.
Have a look. That's great. All right, let's see. What do we do if you have brown patch in the grass? Is there a specific product that you would recommend for that?
Yeah. So I don't treat these things. You probably got that figured out from now. I don't really like to be having to do this. Back to the pesticide use. You're talking about doing repeat applications on a preventative basis for something that's really just cosmetic value. But it's your personal choice. I mean, I just try to give the information and you decide what can happen. And you can do this either in a liquid or a granular form. Here, I brought some of these products in for show and tell. I should probably show them. So this, if you can see it, and the names might change. This is called liquid systemic fungicide 2. You can get this in a spray form, which I have here. You can get this in a granular form that you can apply to your lawn. It's the same active ingredient, the same material. When I say systemic, that's a misnomer. The accurate term for this is a penetrant. This does not move up and down throughout the plant or very weakly. Mostly when you apply it to the plant, it penetrates into the leaf tissue, but it will remain in effect for up to 30 days without washing off. So this works very effectively on the brown patch for turf. It works effectively on the mildew for a lot of our ornamental plants, but it's not something that you would necessarily want to use on a vegetable or fruit situation. So in that kind of environment, if we're looking at vegetable garden, we might go with something like copper, which is a natural material that's used it meets organic garden standards. So a lot of people start to use this. but it's an example of a contact fungicide. So it washes off and has to be applied more frequently. So that's just a couple examples. So yeah, if I was dealing with brown patch in a lawn, I would look at like this, which is just called the liquid systemic fungicide made by Fertilome, or actually we sell one that's made by BioAdvance. It's the same active ingredient. It's called fungus control for lawns. But that's where those of us at the plant clinic can really help you. So come in, talk to us. We'll lay out the options. And then it's a matter of finding one that's easy for you to use at the right price.
Okay. We have a lot more questions that have come in, but I have one if you have time to take. Definitely.
Let's take that one, and then we're going to talk about insect. I only have one insect I'm going to talk about. So
okay. All right. The question is, it's sort of a 2-in-1. Do we rotate fungicides? Is that a better way to do it to prevent building up resistance? And then if you see a fungus disease, should you cut off the diseased area? We had actually had another person ask if they should cut off the powdery mildew infected hydrangea leaves. So that's a
right. So the answers are yes and yes. We do want to rotate between different classes of fungicides. So that's why, again, why I just encourage you to come in and talk to us. So we try to carry a variety of fungicides because, like I said, this is something you're doing on repeat applications. So, for example, if you were using something like this systemic fungicide, and I keep doing this over and over and over repeatedly, I'm selecting for diseases, fungal organisms that are resistant to this. So it's good to rotate between different classes of fungicides occasionally. And some of these products, when you get into the details on the label, will even limit you and say, they might tell you on the label, use no more than twice a year, use no more than 3 times a year. When you see instructions like that, they're doing that specifically to try to reduce that case of pesticide resistance. So absolutely you want to do that. And also when we talk about sanitation, yes, that's what I mean when I say removing leaves or cutting off infected portions. Just if you clip off a leaf that's diseased and put it in the trash, you are collecting spores and putting them in the trash. By itself, that may not give you total effective treatment. But hey, if I'm collecting 10,000 spores or 500,000 spores and I'm putting them out in the trash, got to say I'm doing something. So that's a good example. I say sanitation. It's just cutting out the diseased portions, and throwing them out. So yeah, so with that, let's move on, Sally. Let me talk a little bit about some insects, and then we will get back to questions. I knew there would be a lot of questions here. I'm trying to cover a lot in a little bit of time. So insects, just like we're saying, we haven't seen too much out there because we've had this cool weather. But it's coming. And I wanted to talk specifically about scale insects because there's just a lot of people are just unfamiliar, don't recognize it. So this is what's called a cottony camellia scale. This insect, you'll find them on hollies, you find them on camellia, you'll find them on yew, most predominantly. Every once in a while, you'll also find them on euonymus. But these insects tend to be host specific. So they're not going to be just randomly covering your entire garden. If you were out looking for them right now, you would see this is about the size of a grain of rice. This is the mature insect, this little black blob. So that's the mature insect. She lays this egg mass. It's about the size of a grain of rice and then dies. So that's the insect that's dead. That's that mass of eggs that's left behind. And it's readily visible, but it's on the underside, the bottom of the leaf. Already, we're starting to see some of those eggs hatch. It's very early, but these eggs start hatching, kind of now as we're going into Memorial Day weekend. Some of these eggs are beginning to hatch. As it warms up, they're going to have more and more of these eggs hatching out. So what we call the crawler phase, and this is highly magnified, or it's magnified actually 10 times. But the little crawlers are these tiny little guys that you see here. And they have that name because the eggs have hatched and they're crawling out from under that egg mass. And at this point in time, they're tiny, they're vulnerable, they're exposed. They don't have this hard waxy shell over them. They have no protection. They're not under that cottony cover. So this is their most vulnerable point in their life cycle. So if we can time this correctly, we can go out and treat the plants and control this pest before it becomes a major issue. So you should be scouting, looking, and if you see these, and the universities keep dates and keep track of all this, that's why we're saying our treatment date is kind of in this mid-June, early June time period. And it's not what you use, it's when you apply it. So we catch them at their most vulnerable state. So this is crepe myrtle bark scale, where here I've got azalea bark scale. Over here is crepe myrtle bark scale, which is the one I really wanted to talk about. Very similar. You can start to see, you know, there's this is azalea bark scale, you know, that the parent insect has died. It's got egg mass. We open that up and we start to see eggs in there. Crepe myrtle bark scale looks very similar to it. Crepe myrtle bark scale is what we call felt scale because they cover themselves with sort of this waxy, felty coating. Originally it came from Asia, I think from Japan, Korea area. It was accidentally introduced into the United States, first reported down in Mississippi in about 2015. And since 2015, it's been kind of gradually marching its way up the East Coast. It first landed here in Virginia. First time I saw it was, I think, 3, maybe 4 years ago. And now it's pretty well established here in Virginia and Maryland, and probably going to continue on up into Pennsylvania. So it's making itself present now. We're seeing people bring it in samples frequently because it's very visible right now. It's these kind of white cottony covers. We're at a point where we're starting to see these eggs hatch, and we call it the little crawlers, and nymphs beginning to emerge in there. This is being as a brand new pest because people are saying, but I never seen this before. I've never had it before. I said, because you didn't have it, you didn't see it. It's a new introduction to our area and it's getting pretty well established. We don't have a complete history on it. We don't know the exact life cycle. We don't know if there's going to be, I think we're going to start probably see about 3 generations a year, which means, okay, they're hatching out now, then they're going to reach maturity and lay eggs, and they're going to continue to mature and reach eggs. So you have these kind of multiple overlapping generations, which means from a control perspective, this is a problem because it's going to build up big populations quickly, and there's plenty of crepe myrtles to go around for them. So where that takes us is I wanted to have just a quick simplified thing of what we do as far as control goes. So you're monitoring, you're watching. We're kind of in that stage right now where they're beginning to hatch. If we find or confirm that the crawlers are present, we can spray them. When I say spray them, you can use a horticultural oil, you can use an insecticidal soap, you can use a general kind of use pesticide. At that vulnerable state, anything will work. But the problem we encounter is like on a crepe myrtle, you have peeling, exfoliating bark that you can see there. They have so many hiding spaces, it's very difficult to get good control. If it's a large plant that might be 25, 30 feet tall, it's very difficult to get control. So like if you have a Nellie Stevens holly that's 25 feet tall and you want to treat it, you can't, and they're on the underside of the leaves, it's very, very difficult to get good application and good control in there. So a lot of us start considering using systemic materials. So this, which I'm going to try to show, the Fertile Home Tree and Shrub Systemic Insect Drench, this you can literally pour. It's a true systemic. I can pour it in the soil. It's absorbed up through the soil and it goes up in the canopy tree. Very effective in control scale. The problem with that approach is that it also goes into the nectar, it goes into the pollen, and so we run that risk of exposure to bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. So we really don't want to be using this too much on flowering plants. So a lot of times when I'm talking with people about our options regarding this crepe myrtle bark scale, I was so happy. I had this conversation last weekend with a customer. He said, well, I'll just cut the flowers off. And I'm like, really? You're willing to do that? That is fantastic. That is a legitimate, valid control measure. She's like, yeah, it's more important to me. I get this plant back to health. I'm going to treat it with systemic, but when it blooms, I'm going to take the flowers off so I don't expose the pollinators. Other people I talked to, well, maybe we just wait and we treat this problem at the end of the bloom cycle as opposed to when it's in there. So there's not a real simple one size fits all kind of answer on that. But again, this is when you come into the clinic, we just kind of like to lay out the situation, give you the information, kind of present you what your choices and options are, and then let you sort of take it from there. So that's I only have like 5 or 6 minutes left, and I know I'd love to get in a couple more questions, so I will stop talking and turn it back over to Sally.
Thanks, David. First question, can you show or tell us the name of the systemic products that you were showing for use with scale?
Okay. Again, these products come under a bunch of different names, and I don't get too hung up on the exact one, but this is the one I brought to show you. It's called Fertilome is the name of the company. Called Tree and Shrub Drench.
Okay. Okay. And then the next question is, because since you were talking about pollinators, I know the systemics can harm the pollinators, so you don't want to use those on flowering plants. Sorry, I can't talk. Is there an issue with the spray on fungicides and other products that are not systemic?
We don't really know. That's the truth of the matter. That a lot of that's being looked at. So I would say I definitely want to avoid using them. Like most of the pollinator activities midday when the plants are in bloom. So we'd rather do that later in the evening or early in the morning. One of the things that happens is it was always assumed that the fungicides do not have an impact on the insects because they're fungicides, they're going after totally different metabolic pathways and stuff. But as there's been more study, more looking at, that opens more questions is basically what it happens. So
okay, so try and spray when the pollinators aren't active.
Yeah, that's the best thing I can tell you, right?
Okay. All right, next question. It's back to the lamb's ear with the yellow leaves. Do you think that's insect related? If so,
I do. So yeah, so thank you for reminding on that. I would tell you, flip the leaf over, look closely for aphids. Lamb's ear is kind of strange that it seems almost to have what I call an allergic reaction sometimes to aphids, where most plants might just curl a little bit. Lamb's ear will get these yellow spots even that turn to brown. This is, again, something if you bring it to clinic, we can put it on the microscope, because I've seen mites can also cause that similar thing, but I'm thinking more likely either aphids or mites, but that's something we'd really like to put on the microscope to
Okay, great. Yeah, since we only have a couple minutes, quick reminder, because there's a lot of questions. If you don't get your question answered today, send me an email. If you're talking about like a specific plant that you are having problems with, if you can send me pictures, that's great. I'll forward it to David, and then he can either get back to you or ask you to bring in a sample. I think is usually the way that works. David, let me know if that's not quite correct. Okay, next question. What insect is red, looks like a spider, and attacks succulents? Is there anything you can do about them?
We're starting to see what are called clover mites, and it probably is a mite. Clover mites, because they move quickly. They come out like that weekend when we were in the 90s. We started seeing they love the warmth. They do feed on plants, but they're rarely problematic. I mean, they rarely get to the point where you really have to treat them. If you do want to treat them, and somebody I saw it scan and said something about aphids even. So in terms of control, I really am a big fan of horticulture oils, because these oils, it's a highly, in this case, this is a highly refined petroleum oil. You can use it on trees and shrubs, fruits and flowers. It's very effective on mites, scale, aphids, any number of soft-bodied insects. It doesn't leave any kind of like toxic residue in regards to impact on pollinators. So if you're dealing with mites on cactus, I would probably look at doing it with a horticultural oil. And again, this comes in all different sizes and prices.
Okay, so that's for use with pretty much everything we've discussed so far.
Yes.
Can you remind me, I think you went over this, but we have a few questions on it. What's the best time to treat the cottony camellia scale or the other scales?
Look for them in the 1st of June. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated again, because there's over 1,000 different types of scale insects, and they follow different life cycles. Some of them have 1 generation, sometimes 3 or 4 generations a year. So the timing can vary, but a lot of them, a lot of the common ones that we look at, seem to overlap right in about that early June time period. So always get in touch with us. That's why I'm trying to give you some looking ahead, trying to tell you ahead of time what to look for. Go out, scout, watch for these things. For a lot of them, our best treatment time is going to come up in that early mid-June time period. So you got a little time to figure it out.
Great. Okay. I know we're running low on time, so I'm just going to go forward with this last question and remind everybody again, if you're on Zoom, you can hit reply to the email with your confirmation details. Send any questions that you have to me. I'll forward them to David and make sure that someone with knowledge is able to get back to you, because I will not be able to help with most of these issues, nor would I presume to. And if you are on Facebook, you can send us an email or call the store. Either one of those things works. There's a contact us page on the website, and that goes to another colleague of mine who also can get your information to David. All right, David, last question. Do you have any favorite remedies that you use? Because I know you don't use a lot of chemicals. This is a question that came in for use getting rid of pests and plant diseases. Do you have any, like, what are your favorites? So if you have any personal favorite recommendations, and this is general, so it might be a difficult question. Yeah. And then the last one is, what are the plants surrounding you on this table right now?
Okay, yeah, I picked, like I said, I kind of went in with the pink and purple today. So I already mentioned I'm a big fan on the petroleum, the all-season spray oil. The limitation that comes with that is you have to be able to get good coverage. So there are times when we're dealing, like I had a lot of people, boxwood leaf miner and boxwood psyllid as an example, that I will go to the systemic products on a plant like boxwood, for example, because it really attracts very few pollinators. They're already done flowering, they're evergreens, you know, so it depends a little bit. So I use, it's either going to be a systemic treatment, if it's something I can't reach with the oil spray. On disease control, we just have to have a conversation about that. Again, the systemic products are going to be more effective because they were absorbed into the plant. They're going to last longer in there, and the convenience works a lot better on those, but I don't want to do that on food crops. So again, there's all these kind of qualifiers. So again, this would be like my go-to on the systemic because it's the least expensive of those on the shelf. I'm not trying to be a Fertilome salesperson, but Fertilome is a co-op for independent garden centers. It allows us to buy at a better price and pass products on sometimes to you at a better price. So that comes into my decision making that's on it. And so that's for insects and disease. Weeds, we can do a whole lot with just good cultural practice, hand weeding, dense plantings, not disturbing. So a couple of my favorites. This is a they call it cranesbill geranium. This is a true geranium, a perennial geranium. This is like one of my love-have plants in the garden. I have two different varieties. It sprawls out like a little ground cover, gives you a nice bloom season that's in there, mostly in the pinks and whites kind of category, but it's so beautiful right now. And you can easily get like 4 weeks of color that's out of it. I'm looking at salvia. Again, this is a particular variety is called Mirage Deep Purple. Again, salvias, great plants for pollinators of all types. I have salvia is like another must-have in my garden in one fork shape, color, or another. Because again, I do this because the hummingbirds tend to really go for it. Carnations, again, or dianthus that's in here. This is a sturdy perennial. One of the things that everybody likes about this is you get this nice blue-green foliage that's on there, and it's actually evergreen. So it can serve a lot of perennials I look at. I love it when I can get an evergreen foliage on it for added interest. So that's who I brought to sit on the table with me today.
Thanks, David. I think it's so great. You and Peg both love salvia, and you always have different cultivar recommendations for it. It's just both the purples, but different ones.
Yeah, you can't go wrong there. They're all great, but I just went with this for the color.
Sounds good. All righty. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We are out of time, and I know there are some questions still. So like I said, please feel free to contact us. We will get your questions answered. David will get your questions answered. I'll take no credit for that. And if you would like a copy of the recording, also reach out. We can get you a link to that. It should be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow. David, thank you so much as always. And I know we'll be doing some traveling for the summer. I know you will be, and I will be at different dates. So either my colleague Danny will be filling in, or and we'll get those dates out for your summer virtual plant clinics soon.
Well, we're going to be back in a couple of weeks, right?
Yes, we will be back in a couple of weeks. We won't stop while I'm out of town, just while you're out of town. So,
Okay.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
All right. See everybody in a couple of weeks.
All right. Bye, David.
Bye.